This program on investing under regulation crowdfunding is not investment advice.
Rising with the crowd, power unbound, change makers lead where hope is found. Superpowers for good, shaping the fate. Investors and dreamers open the gate. Supercross stands loud, proud and true, building tomorrow for me and you.
Welcome, everyone, to the Superpowers for Good show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and we're going to take a little departure today from our normal crowdfunding content to talk a little bit with Fredericks, who is the executive director of One for the World, a nonprofit that is really trying to focus on and direct cash toward the most effective nonprofits. So this is going to be an interesting and important conversation. Stick around. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Devin.
Well, we're excited. You know, this idea of moving money to effective nonprofits is really, I think, a noble endeavor. How did you come to join this movement?
So effective giving really is a recent, I think, movement that's looked at this unusual truth. And that is that when you ask people, how much more effective do you think a highly effective organization is from your average nonprofit? Most people will be like, oh, maybe it's 2, 3, 4 times, maybe 10 times more effective. But the latest research shows the most highly effective organizations can be 100 times or even more effective than your average nonprofit. And so as you think about that, suddenly it's like, well, wow, I might be able to give 5 or 10% more in a given year, but I can't give 100 times what I did the year before, but I could maybe be 100 times more effective in my giving. So this is a space that's existed just maybe 10, 15 years. And one of the organizations that got launched in the space was One for the World. And I actually came to learn about the organization way back in 2018. And I've just been a fan of their work until I joined as executive director just 4 months ago.
You know, it is, I think, an important discussion to be thinking about, you know, what is effective, right? Because I think everybody wants their donated dollars to make a difference. They don't, you know, we don't do it very often. You know, I guess there are some donors, right, that are doing this because of the fame or notoriety that they would get from a big donation to a university or something. But at the same time, most of us, ordinary donors, especially, that, you know, we're never going to get a name on a building, you know, wing of a hospital or a wing of a museum. Not going to happen. So we want our dollars to be effective. I think that it's good. How are some of the ways that you measure effective?
I think it's a great question. And luckily, we at One for the World don't have to do that ourselves. There's another organization called GiveWell that has this very rigorous approach. And I think one thing that makes it easy for us to do effective giving fundraising is the fact that we're not the researchers, but rather we lean on the expertise of others who've marketed that. What I will say, though, is there's a couple really important guiding principles. And I think the centerpiece of that is more or less, what is the cost effectiveness per death averted or life saved? And, you know, that sounds somewhat like a simple idea at first, but you actually have to think, well, gosh, how do I actually calculate that? So let's say, you know, that, you know, a certain number of people are likely to contract or die of malaria when there are no nets. Not every single net you give is going to avert a death, but rather at aggregate, as you get more malarial nets in communities that are at high risk, and those are being properly used, you can see that average rate drop. So there's a lot of like inputs that go into this. That's also true of things like vitamin A supplementation and other types of impact spaces. So there's a lot of math, there's a lot of research really looking at, you know, this idea of what does it cost to avert a death or save a life. Right now, those most effective charities tend to float around $5,000, $5,500 per life saved or death averted. And most of those organizations are working in the global South around public health issues that particularly affect very young people, and that you tend to get the biggest tail of impact when you're targeting, young people who are dying of preventable causes. And today, 14,500 children die a day of preventable causes. And, we know that we can be the first generation that actually bridges the gap and reduces that number to near zero.
It is exciting to think about the potential for really changing the game, right? We in the developed world don't see polio anymore. And no one in the world has had smallpox in, 50, 60 years now? 50 years, I think.
1976.
I remember,
Yeah.
explaining to my son that everybody has a little pockmark on their arm from getting a smallpox vaccination. And he said, I don't. I said, what do you mean you don't? Of course you do. And I made him take off his shirt. This is like 20 years ago. And he was like 13. And we looked and he doesn't. And the reason he doesn't is he didn't get a smallpox vaccination because there is no more smallpox. So the world can change, right? We can make these differences. And, polio used to affect 350,000 people a year, 35, 40 years ago. Now it's dozens, right?
Absolutely.
Guinea worm disease used to affect millions. Now it's a dozen. We make differences. What do you see as the next big opportunity? Can we do that to malaria? Eliminate it or reduce it to tiny numbers?
So I think malaria is a great candidate for that. And we know that there are 2 of the 4 organizations on GiveWell's list are in fact focused on malaria. You have Against Malaria Foundation and also the Malaria Consortium. So we know that's one space. Another one is vitamin A supplementation tends to be just a very cost-effective way that reduces risk of blindness. It reduces child mortality rates. So that's another, what you consider like low-hanging fruit of impact. And then I think as you continue to expand out, even there's another organization called New Incentives that is basically just getting just-in-time funding to parents who can't afford to take their children for the immunizations. So this is less about a specific disease and more about a specific context, and that parents who are enthusiastic to get their kids the care they need may not be able to afford to take their kids to every immunization appointment in the right time window. Maybe the nearest clinic is 30 minutes away. Maybe they would need a ride on a motorcycle. Maybe they would need this, And so we know that when you get just-in-time funding for those, which is the work of New Incentives, that's another one where it's less about the specific disease and more about the use case. But it's exciting because we're not at like the beginning of this journey. And that's what's fascinating to me. In 1960, and pretty much all recorded human history before 1960, the majority of humans lived in extreme or abject poverty. Since then, not only has the percentage gone down, but the total number has gone down. So as much as addressing, global extreme poverty at large feels just like this giant insurmountable thing, we're kind of like at the 23-mile mark, in this marathon. We're not starting at the beginning. We're well into this work. And right now the question is it going to take us 5 more years or 50 more years to finish the job and put this into our past the same way that we are able to put, polio and smallpox and other types of use cases. So it's just, we're really at the precipice of doing something amazing.
It is exciting. I'm very fond of pointing out that when I was born, a majority of the world's population lived in abject poverty. The kind you're talking about, this extreme, less than $2 a day kind of poverty. That was the way most people lived. And now it's like 10%. And not only is it a smaller percentage, as you say, right? I'm just echoing what you just said, but it's so important for people to take this to heart. There are fewer people living in poverty than there were 5 billion people ago. Every person, in effect, at least in terms of the count, right? Every person added to the global population over my lifetime has been added into a higher economic level. And it's because I think not in spite of, effective philanthropy. Right? Some people argue that philanthropy doesn't help. In fact, let's talk a little bit about that. There are some critics of bed nets and malaria interventions that suggest that giving people bed nets is ineffective because they misuse them. They use them for fishing nets. They don't hang them properly. They don't work. That people who sell them go out of business because organizations give them away. What's your reaction to that?
I think there are
critique of philanthropy here in this case.
Yeah, well, I think there are three places where we always should pause and think about how we can be effective in philanthropy. I think number one is just because it can be done well doesn't mean it is being done well. So what I really like about GiveWell's evaluations is that they're not just looking at cause areas, but they're saying these are the organizations in those cause areas doing it well. So are there organizations that are not doing a great job distributing and making sure that bed nets are being used? Absolutely. I'm sure those exist. But when you look at in particular, I've done a deep dive on the data with Against Malaria Foundation, and they are so evidence-based, so detailed in the way that they're doing that work that I feel very confident, as a person who does effective giving myself, giving my money there. So there are organizations who may not do it well, and that's why these third-party evaluators are so important, like GiveWell. The second thing is beyond just how effective organizations are, we also need to look at how we fit into the grander scheme of the world. And there is a criticism that many organizations can fall into a model of work that represents parallels or even maintains elements of colonialism. And we ought to grapple with that as well. And I do think there are increasingly better ways to sort of take an uncolonized, decolonized, or anti-colonial approach to international development work. And we see more and more organizations doing that. And I think, once again, New Incentives model is give money to parents who want to vaccinate their children is, we're trusting them to use this money effectively. And it turns out they do, on average, use it effectively. That requires trusting direct beneficiaries in a way that old models of development were unwilling to do. So we see even that value leads to better outcomes. And then I think thirdly, I think there is a need for us to constantly be willing to revise our positions and opinions when new evidence comes out. There are organizations that have been historically on GiveWell's list that are not today, and there'll be other ones that will be added on. The big evaluation is it big scale? Is it neglected, and is it tractable? Well, it might be that we do so good, as a world addressing malaria that maybe it's not such a big scale issue, and finally the amount of resources that are already going into it are sufficient for the needs to finish the job. In which case, we focus our attention, what's the next horizon? What's the next place that is requiring us to give most effectively? And we need to constantly be willing to change our position based on new evidence. And so, I think these three things really guide me as an individual donor, and I think perhaps guide many of our organizations working in the space as well.
Well, I think there's just no question that we need to be really thoughtful about how we donate, where we donate, what we donate to. And I appreciate you helping us understand the importance and certainly one of the ways of determining that effectiveness. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Listen, everybody, we're going to take a quick break, but we're here with Frank Fredericks. He is the executive director of One for the World. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Frank about his superpower. So stick around. You don't want to miss this.
You can get in on the ground floor to help fix the climate crisis for as little as $100. Pause now to scan the QR code to get started or visit s4g.biz/raisegreen. You can beat a green at Raise Green.
Want to learn from the world's great change makers? Find your superpower. Subscribe to the Superpowers for Good newsletter at superpowersforgood.com. Make your strengths into superpowers that will change the world. Join the super crowd today. Superpowers4good.com.
Hope to raise money from the impact crowd. Good investors are as interested in community, social or environmental impact as you. Connect with Funding Hope. an SEC-registered FINRA member crowdfunding portal to learn how to raise capital from the impact crowd. Scan the QR code now.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with Frank Fredericks, the Executive Director of One for the World, and we've been talking to him about his approach to effective giving through One for the World. We're going to shift gears now to talk to Frank about his superpower, so stick around. You don't want to miss this. Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. You have, obviously a position of significant responsibility today, but this has grown out of a career devoted to impact in a variety of ways, founding nonprofits, leading change, and I congratulate you for your success. What is your superpower?
That's such a great question. To zoom out and zoom back in, I see my mission personally in this world broadly to both reduce human suffering and expand human flourishing. And my personal theory of change on that is I fundamentally believe we're the first generation that has the idea, people, and resources to solve all of our problems. And the impetus is upon us to make those connections. So my job is to connect ideas, people, resources. And that is, I don't know if that's a superpower or just an obsession, but really constantly looking for creative ways to do that is really what my primary mission and work is. And I think there's three ways I really like to put that into motion. And one is I want to make it personal. I want to make it persuasive, and I want to be able to scale. And those are the three sort of things I really push on. I think where my superpowers may lie. Personal, even when we talk about effective giving, I often start many of the talks with the story from my own family. When my parents were ages 25 and 27, they had 4 kids. I grew up, in a mixture of California and the Pacific Northwest. It was hard for them. And I know that for them, it was extremely difficult when they found my younger brother's body lying or hanging from his crib. And he had died from a crib death. And, that's something, it's a hard story for me to tell, but it's a story I'm telling often today because I'm a father of 3. And I think, gosh, how hard would it be to have to go through that? And then I think about the 4,000 children who are dying a day of preventable causes. They have parents who feel just as passionately about them, who love their kids, who lament that loss as much as I would my children or my parents did my brother. And, I have to be willing every day to make it personal, not just in telling that story, but how I relate to our donors, our partners, our board members, everyone. And I really focus on relationships to drive this work. So I think that's one. I think 2 is persuasive. Coming out of that is too much, I think, in the impact spaces. People maybe default to thinking that we need to inform. If people only knew information, they would all agree with us, right? But if knowledge was power, doctors would be healthy, lawyers would be law-abiding citizens, shrinks sane, I could go on, clergy pious, but that's not the world we live in. People need to be persuaded to take action. And so I think basically really focusing on the act of persuasion, the skills of persuasion is really important. I wake up every day and I look for opportunities to change other people's minds and create space for me to change my own. And then the third, and maybe this is the clearest answer for you, I'm a social entrepreneur through and through. Even at this organization that I didn't found, One for the World, is the first time I've actually been a senior executive at a place that I didn't found it. I'm constantly looking at what's our value proposition? Do we understand the right metrics of growth? How do we figure out this right combination between our solution matching that problem? And I'm constantly tapping into my entrepreneurial toolbox to figure out, okay, great, we're doing this right now. We've moved a total of $7 million to date, $1.5 million last year. What would it look like if we reached 100 million? How do we 5x, 10x, 50x our impact? And, that scale is essential, I think, to really leading to the level of impact that we think is possible. And that's what I'm dedicated to.
It is wonderful to hear about your superpower, and I appreciate you helping us try to understand that. I wonder if you could share an example of how you have used your superpower in the past to good effect.
Yeah. So it's funny, this actually comes from my consulting experience, and I've done probably as much for-profit as nonprofit in my life, and I'm still looking for the impact. But one thing that I found just uh, following the process and being able to see where it leads you is I was helping a small startup working on skincare for babies, like basically a baby bath product. And that was hypoallergenic. And they were convinced this is going to be the direction. This is what's going to matter. So we went through the kind of lean startup process. We did some survey data. We started interviewing parents. We're going through this process. And our hypothesis initially was, okay, this is going to be, our value proposition is going to be a safe product for parents who have children with skin conditions that require a hypoallergenic, whatever, right? Thought very linearly about it. Then after we started getting on the phone, and we were interviewing parents, but it happened to only be mothers who booked the calls with us. They were mostly working mothers. And that what we found is the mothers who are most enthusiastic about the product and were willing to pay 10 times as much as maybe the Johnson & Johnson product off the shelf was that they were working mothers and they had stay-at-home moms themselves. And the value proposition really came down to, I want to be able to demonstrate to myself and my family that just because I'm not a stay-at-home mom like I experience, that I have the ability to care for my family and to be there. And just going through that process, nobody could have expected it. Like, it wasn't in any of our hypotheses beforehand, but just taking this very open, exploratory, curious perspective on life will reveal things to you that you can never anticipate, that you'll never know is there, and ultimately can unlock, the growth potential for what you're doing. And so those are that's the process and the thinking I really like to bring into everything I do, is being open to having something completely unanticipated, come up, and then be able to zoom in on that, double down, and say, okay, this is where we're going.
Yeah. Excellent. We're running short on time. Give us a quick tip on how we can deploy your superpower.
Awesome. I always invite founders to reach out to me. I just love coaching or mentoring folks who are impact minded, and whether that's for-profit, nonprofit, bootstrap, VC backed, crowdfunded. So I'm always happy to chat with people about how you can have more impact in your world, especially if you're using an entrepreneurial method to do so. And at the end of the day, I'm happy to support folks in their own journeys. And it's what I really appreciate about actually the space that you've created, is that there are so many people who are founders, and, very few people found something just to make money, and most of those don't succeed. You've really cultivated a community of people who are looking to solve problems. And I'm happy to be a part of that community and support however I can.
Well, thank you. As we wrap up now, will you take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about One for the World, how they can, connect with you personally and organizationally, et cetera, how, maybe folks can follow on social media, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So onefortheworld.org is our organization. You can see it right there on the screen. You can, on our website, take our 1% pledge, where people will commit 1% of their income to highly effective charities. So we invite anyone to do that. And we have a contact us on the website. You can always reach out to us. We'd love to hear from folks. Suggestions, questions, want to chat, it's all open. And then you can find me personally, of course, on LinkedIn, which is the easiest way to find me, if not through our website.
Excellent. Well, Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We want to see this trend, this global trend toward the eradication of poverty and suffering continue. We want to see poverty eradicated in 5 years, not 50. Thank you for being with us. We wish you every success in the work that you're doing.
And thank you so much, Devin, for creating this space. It's such a blessing.
All righty. Let's do some good.